Okay, so we're like at 6 after. Maybe we can get started with some intros here.
Sure.
Do you want to? Oh, we are recording. Okay, cool. Well, welcome everyone to the UX Content Strategy Montreal meetup. In quotes, because what is Montreal? What is space anymore at this point? Um, so some of you may know I actually moved to Montreal from New York last year, and prior to leaving New York, I co-organized the UX Content Design Meetup NYC with our lovely presenters today. So we thought it would be super fun to bring them to Montreal and share some of their expertise of content strategy and content design principles and processes at Mastercard. So today we have Melinda, Selene, and Etana, who are here to grace us with their presence. And so just a couple like quick housekeeping notes. I know some of you submitted questions in advance, which was great. Thank you so much. So we're going to do a little curated Q&A at the end of those questions, but feel free to drop things in the chat and we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll try to bring those up if we can as well, if we have time at the end. And yeah, just I guess make sure that everyone's on mute and let's get rolling.
All right. We'll share. Is everyone seeing a full screen presentation right now? Okay, awesome.
Yes, yeah.
Great. So welcome to Content Principles and Processes at Mastercard. We believe that it pays dividends to have a strategic approach to your content. So in this presentation, we'll take you behind our velvet rope at Mastercard and show you a little bit about how we handle it for our digital products and services. And you'll see here not all of our Twitter handles, but at least Celine's at the top, and then mine, and then ours for UX Content Design NYC, which is the meetup that we do. And we also have a tagline, content is priceless. So to tell you a little bit about our team, I started at Mastercard about 3.5 years ago. I've been working in content for close to 20 years, which is insane to me. But I was the only one at the time who identified as a content person, much less a strategist or a designer. I was the only person who was like, I do content, I'm an SME. And now 3.5 years later, there are 3 teams across the organization that are dedicated to content, which is amazing. It's been an amazing thing to watch. We have a team on technical documentation. We have a team on our customer services platform. And then we have our team, which handles digital products and services. So when I first started, I was all alone. I was very stressed, and I did a little bit of everything. I had my hands in all kinds of pots, which was a great way if you're a solo person at the moment, solo team of one. It's a fantastic way to learn a new organization. It worked really well, and also it helped us to create a lot of demand for the service of content strategy or content design. And out of that came more scale. If you notice, our team is pretty big at the moment for a content team. I think we're pretty proud of that. And now we have the luxury to specialize. So what we do at Mastercard now is that we are dedicated to 3 large product initiatives at Mastercard, generally with 2 people on each one. And we're able to really focus our energies on the things that really matter, that get us a little more spotlight and a little more attention at the organization as a whole, to help us kind of build a little more knowledge about who we are and what we do. And on this call, you'll hear Selene Rosenberg, who's our content design manager. She was my first hire, and in some ways one of my best hires because she's awesome. And then Etana Solomon, who joined us about a year after that, who joined us as a college hire and stayed with us, which is amazing. So you'll hear her talk a little bit as well. Moving on to our next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we define what we do. And you'll obviously hear people say content strategy, you'll hear people say content design. We say content design because we work every day very closely with designers, and calling ourselves designers as well kind of helps in the everyday to reinforce that we design what's on the screen just as much as they do. On any given day, at least half of our screens are content, sometimes more, depending, especially with the form. And that means that every experience that we design is a content experience. It's not Instagram, it's not pictures, it's mostly words. So if we want people to move through that experience in a fluid and seamless way, the way to do that is to make sure that they're getting the right content at the right time and also the right amount of content. And it's also really important that that content be clear and easy for them to understand. We really focus on low literacy and non-native speakers of English to make sure that they're included in the way that we write our content. We also work across the organization to make sure that we're telling the right story about our products and services, so that we're presenting our benefits in a way that the user can hear them, in a way that the user can understand, this is how this is going to be beneficial to me. This is how this product serves me. And if I have a problem, this is how the product is helping to support me to get the right information to solve it. I'm trying to like move the slides myself. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about our overall approach from a high level, and then we'll move into some of the more nitty-gritty details about our work. So we have 3 high-level content initiatives. The first one being thought leadership, which is kind of what we're doing right now. We have our own meetup, as I mentioned, in New York City. It's really about 2 things: being able to meet our people externally that are outside of the Mastercard ecosystem, to share knowledge, share best practices, commiserate about how tough our jobs can be sometimes, and learn. And then there's also the kind of internal piece, which is about educating the folks around us about what we do, how best to work with us, and also making sure that we align with our internal communities on the way that we approach things and the tools that we use and the things that we can do to make things better. Because we're always learning. This is such a new field and none of us know all of it, right? We're never going to know all of it. So it's really kind of keeping up that cycle of continuous learning. The second piece is about strategies and systems. So we, as I said, work on very high level products within the organization at Mastercard, things that have a lot of executive attention. And it's really important for us to make sure that we're really helping to sell these products and services to users. We often have a very defined product strategy around our B2B customers, banks and issuers, things like that, merchants, people who are using Mastercard products to sell things or to connect better with their customers. But we don't often have a great proposition for the end user of that product, not because we don't care about it, but because our team needs to come in and help everyone think about it. That's what UX does. So making sure that we're understanding what the benefits are to that end user, that we're crafting a story and a framework that we can share internally so that everyone is on the same page about how we talk about the product, what it does for the user, why a user should use it, why they should keep coming back. And if we have a truly consistent and compelling story, it will resonate with them anywhere they are across the user journey, no matter what piece of content they come across. And the final piece is really where the rubber meets the road. It's this content creation, which is really where a lot of the work is done. It's the actual execution of the strategy. So making sure that we're creating these robust product glossaries and term banks that we can pull from, that we're reusing content when we can. It's translation approval processes even, anything about getting the content actually into the product itself or into any of the pieces of the ecosystem, like websites that we might create or emails, and delivering the content in a way that is efficient. And that kind of keeps us moving through the process. And a piece of that is collaboration and talking to all of our partners. And Selene, I'm going to talk to you about that.
Sorry, I did an accidental click ahead, but thank you, Melinda, for that. So yeah, as Melinda was mentioning, there's kind of 3 higher level initiatives that we're really focused on. And when we're working on those things, you know, we are now, I guess, not such a small team anymore, but we don't work on those things just by ourselves. We actually work and collaborate across the company with basically every single department in the company. So whether that's working with our product partners to, you know, align and define what the experience is going to be, working with our marketing partners to talk about the language that we're using. We work with our legal partners very closely to make sure that everything we're saying is true and that we're legally allowed to say it. We, of course, partner very closely with our UX designers to shape the experience And then we'll work with our developers to make sure that all the language we're using is going to be feasible inside the product. So, you know, can we have dynamic content in a certain place, or can we surface something, you know, can we lead down two different paths depending on what the user selects? So we have to work with everyone to really make sure that we're bringing these experiences to life in the correct way. And so we like to think that we're integral across all these departments. All right, and so when are we doing our jobs, you know, throughout the product lifecycle? It's really all the time. So we're not just kind of swooping in at the end after the designs have been made and kind of filling in some blank boxes. Like, that's not how we want to be working. So we really need to be there through every step of the way, from the very beginning, where we're gonna define what the experience is gonna be, to then moving into design, development, testing and refining, going into release, optimizing the product after release through further testing and refinement, and then finally scaling our products globally across the world, depending on the product that we're working on, but a lot of Mastercard's products are global. And so Melinda likes to say sometimes that, you know, or people say that UX is kind of the glue that holds the experience together. And Melinda likes to say that content design is kind of the glue within the glue, because we're really working with all of these people across all of these different phases of experience development. So, you know, we're creating that consistency that keeps everything cohesive. All right, so having said that, what exactly are we doing all those times across the product lifecycle? So here's kind of 8 main higher level tactical initiatives that we tackle. I'll kind of talk a bit about what each of these could entail. So starting with research, that could be our own desktop research. Maybe we're just digging into like, what is the competitive landscape, or even doing like a content audit on our own site or various materials about our own products to see what's out there. It could, of course, be like usability testing, you know, market testing, lots of different ways to do research. Then we have product strategy. So that's a little bit what Melinda talked about earlier with these like product visions and value statements. How are we kind of defining the value and finding our positioning for the experience that we're creating? Then there's feature articulation. So this could include things like relationship mapping, where we're really kind of uncovering the different systems within an experience. How do they connect together? How is a user going to kind of move through these things? What is the kind of information architecture or the nomenclature that we need to use to make an experience come to life? Product content, very important. So this is kind of our UX writing lane, where we're actually producing the content inside the experience and also outside the experience. So that could go from anything from microcopy to SMS and emails. Then we have down in the lower left, content operations. So this could be workflows and governance, managing UI strings, maybe even working with like translation agencies when we're scaling globally. Marketing content, so working with our marketing partners to make sure that any marketing materials they're developing are kind of aligned with what we're saying inside of the product as well. Support content, so this can range anything from like FAQs that we're creating to maybe a chat bot. It can also include the like implementation guides and things that we make for our developer facing platforms and those audiences. And then we also work on sales content. So that can be creating like a sales narrative that someone would use in the field with a customer when they're pitching. Or we also work with our in-house solutions team, where they're creating demos that are used for sales pitches, and we'll help them create language for those demos. So that's a lot of things, but I'm just gonna dive into a few of them. All right, so first up, I'm gonna talk about voice and messaging guides. So you might call this a style guide or a product content guide, content style guide. Shopify has a really amazing style guide system, so shout out to Shopify on that. I won't go too into depth on style guides. There's a lot out there already. You could do a whole presentation just on style guides alone. But what we really like to include in our style guides are, messaging guides, glossaries and terminologies. We'll include description matrices because at Mastercard, we are often working across various different audiences. So sometimes the way that we're talking about our experience needs to change depending on who we're talking to, whether it's a B2B audience or is it that like B2B to C or B2C. So we need to have different examples of the language that we're using. We also have format guides. So that's really looking into how do we want the content to appear in the experience. So could it be title case or sentence case for our headers? Do we want to use periods at the end of our bullets? So all these kind of finer details need to be captured. And the reason that it's so important to capture all these fine details is so that any new writer can kind of come onto a team and start writing in style, like on brand, way faster. And potentially it can also help non-designers too. If you have a designer on your team who's going for that extra credit and wants to dig into a style guide and put content into their screens that's on brand and using the correct style, we definitely want them to be able to do so. And for me personally, I find style guides very helpful at Mastercard because a lot of the experiences that we're creating are, from a technology standpoint, very complex. And we're also dealing with a lot of personal, sensitive information. So we really need to figure out the best way to communicate to our users in a way that is comprehensible and also makes them feel comfortable, and is also, giving them the full disclosure of what is happening with their information, why, how, who is handling it. So we really look to test all of our content, which I'll talk about, and then codify any findings that we have around that in our style guides so that we're always communicating consistently and accurately and in a way that resonates with our users. Okay, product vision and value statements. So yeah, Melinda talked about these a bit earlier. So these are really more of kind of a prose look at what is the problem that our product or service is going to be solving for the user and why we are providing the best possible solution for that. This also really helps us determine hierarchy of messaging and positioning. So when you go to then pull this story through, say a landing page like I have here, or maybe in a carousel, okay, what message am I going to start with? What's most important? What comes next? And that helps you kind of lay everything out. So I know some of us who work in user experience might be a bit hesitant to kind of work on something that really is so tied to marketing, but it's really important that you are co-creating these with your marketing partners. It's something that one of my content design heroes, Scott Kuby, said is to really embrace marketing. And I believe that that is the best way to do this. So kind of, for example, you want to make sure that you're aligning with your marketing partners. So for example, if you look at this site here, there's kind of a blurred line between what is UX and what is marketing. So you have your navigation items at the top. So that kind of microcopy or that element would be considered UX. Then you move into the hero image and it's a bit shorter. So maybe that's marketing, maybe it's UX, like not really sure. And then down below, okay, it's more of like a fully fleshed out thought. So maybe that would be marketing's purview. But when you're working on a site, it doesn't really make sense to have multiple people, adding to the same thing with a different perspective. So you really want to make sure that you're fully aligned on the language you're using. You don't want your user to see one thing in the navigation, another thing in the header, and another thing in the body copy.
Hey, Selene, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think there might be people waiting to get in. Is there any chance we can just do a quick little check?
Yes.
So sorry.
Got him.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, let me know if that happens again. All right. So moving into content research, this is actually one of my favorites. And there's kind of, I guess, two ways or like main ways you can do content research. You can kind of do it on your own as a content designer. You can be doing, like I mentioned, like your own desktop research. At Mastercard, we use UserZoom to run our own tests very quickly. We also have access to a platform called Wevo that allows us to do like heat map testing and things like that on various websites and pages, which is pretty cool. You can also, I think it's so important to work, if you're working with a research team, if you're lucky enough to have that capability, that you are helping them to create the content that goes into the prototypes or screens that you're testing. Like Melinda mentioned, you know, content is 50% of the design. So if you're testing a design that has kind of dummy content or content that was written by a well-intentioned designer, but you know that's not necessarily their place of expertise, you might end up, your users are going to see that content, they're going to respond to it, it's going to skew your results, and you're going to end up getting feedback that isn't on really what you're intending to find out about. So it's super important that you're using the most real content that you can when you're doing research. Okay, and finally, we have UX product content. And so I put this slide last here because it kind of is the last thing that you can get to. It's not possible to start writing for your experience to really use language that's going to resonate with your users and meet their needs if you haven't done all of the upfront work that I mentioned earlier. And so it's kind of to show that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes before you see, you know, the shiny content that's in the experience in front of you. And what I mean by UX product content is really basically anything that's inside or surrounding an experience. So that's kind of what you would see here on the screens, like promotional content, where it says like, welcome to your mobile ID, everything you need to prove your identity right in your pocket, down to the microcopy. So saying continue and cancel, error messages and success messages, any kind of text messages that are triggered by the experience. So we have a lot of verification codes that the user would need to enter in, or maybe they're getting an email that lets them know you created a profile or you added a card. All these things kind of fall into the purview of product content. And Etana is going to tell you a little bit more about our approach to that at Mastercard.
Yeah, thank you so much, Selene. So we heard a little bit about how our team got here, how we're run, and what we do, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do it. So there's three main things that you kind of want to focus on when we're talking about product content specifically. So this is when you're working on a product, and did the screen go to the next one?
Still on best practices.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Okay, perfect. So looking at product collaboration, this is super, super important. And I think it's important for you if you're a solo content designer or content strategist, or you're with a team, having product buy-in and being able to work well with the product team is really imperative. We talk a lot about your partnership and working and collaborating with designers with kind of table stakes at this point, but working with product is a really good way to have a better understanding of the functionality and the terminology needed to kind of get buy-in from more of the business objective standpoint. And when you get product buy-in, that means you get budget for user testing and research, and kind of support with timelines and having real say in the roadmap. So we definitely encourage everyone to kind of formulate that good working relationship with the product team. Another thing we like to focus on when we're kind of digging into product creation is really focusing on the user tasks, right? So the user is always brought up as the most important part of user experience, but really nailing down what the user needs to do is a way to put yourself in the user's shoes and also make sure that the language that you're using is guiding them through the end-to-end experience. And then the last thing that is super important is design research, right? This is broad for a reason because the research should be happening throughout the full breadth of product development, but we're really going to focus on what you can do as a content designer to test your product content and make sure that you're writing in a way that the user will understand. So diving a little deeper into product collaboration, this idea of the content first approach is something you've definitely heard before, and even Melinda mentioned it earlier on, but it's making sure that you're not writing for a specific character count or for a specific, box on a screen. You want to make sure that you're able to communicate to the user and communicate everything that the user is going to need to kind of guide themselves and limit friction within the experience. So making sure that again, you have the ability to communicate with the team members and collaborate to make priority is really important. And if you're coming late, try to make sure that you're working well with the designers so that when the designer is kind of making tweaks or putting together a new flow, that your partnership is able to ensure that that communication to the user is at the forefront of what you're putting out for the new product or flow or whatever you're working on task within the product experience. The second thing that's super important for product collaboration is kind of supporting your decisions, right? And how you support your decisions is going to look differently based on the resources that you have. But something that we all have access to is Google Trends. Google Trends allows you to kind of search a term based off of what people are Google searching, right? So it's, really top of mind language that you're putting in when you're looking up a word or phrasing. And so this idea of if you're trying to decide whether you should say register or activate an account or profile, right? And sign up, log in. All of these things are questions that we ask ourselves and things that need to be defined within one of those messaging guides that Selene talked about earlier. And so being able to support your decisions can mean something, as simple as that. It could mean, I worked on a product and we did research and those research findings gave quantitative examples or qualitative examples. But again, just making sure that you're able to back up kind of your terminology and phrasing choices with real concrete research or evidence within the field. And then attention to detail. This is super important, and definitely, I am a college hire. I'm coming out of college, and I've been in this kind of school state where you're pushing things out, and sometimes the quality is not necessarily as important as the content. But when you're looking at a product experience and there's only a few words on the page, you never want to cause friction with the user with inconsistencies, whether it be in casing or in grammatical structure. It could even be with punctuation and word choice. So if you're saying continue throughout the whole experience and then a random screen says next, that is going to cause friction, even if it's not overt. It's going to confuse the user because it's a completely new button in a place that they're expecting on the next screen to see a continue, right? So just remaining consistent and clear is super important. And then the last part in terms of product collaboration is identify your style, right? So the way that I write is completely different from the way Selene writes and Melinda writes, but those voice and messaging, voice and tone guidelines really help us align, you know, what we're writing around the product, and being able to identify kind of my strengths and my weaknesses allows us to work better as a team to make sure that we're pushing out something that's consistent and our best. So now looking at the user tasks, right? So start new projects by answering a few questions about your user, and then really hone in on kind of their thoughts, feelings, and needs throughout this. So the first question that I often ask is, who are the users we're targeting, right? Super simple, but we're kind of programmed to think about this in terms of like a marketing persona. So even I still make this mistake sometimes in trying to really get into the user's head. I'm thinking more of like, okay, how old are they? Or are they a mom? Are they young? Do they live in a city, right? But all of these things don't really matter. You kind of have to hone it in on what are the qualities that the user has that's going to affect them getting through the task at hand, right? So are they tech savvy? Are they first adopters? Do they need to have a need for this product, right? Is this something that we want them to sign up for because they've signed up for a different one? So we want to know the background and experience that they have with our other products in order to better serve them. The next question that I often ask is, what task must the user complete, right? User tasks is super simple, but you want to know, are they logging in? Are they making a payment? Are they contacting customer service, right? If you're logging in for the first time, that's super easy. You get your password out, right? But maybe customer service inquiry, that's frustrating, right? If you have to kind of go through that step. So you want to make sure not only knowing the user task, but then the next question is, what is the user thinking right now? Right? So what do they need to enter? Do they need to provide, I'm sure, at least speaking from my experience in the past 6 months, I've canceled more than one flight, right? So I need my ticket number, I need my destination when I'm making that inquiry, and that can be annoying if I have to go down in my emails and all of these things. So you wanna try to put yourself in their shoes when they're doing this. The way to do that is to the next question that I asked, which is, what is the user feeling at, right? So maybe they're frustrated, maybe they're excited, maybe they're just curious and want to check it out. And then you can ask kind of what do they need to take the next step, right? So you want to make sure that you're setting your user up for success by making sure that they know what's coming down the pipeline. You don't want to surprise them on the next screen, because that in itself will cause confusion if they're expecting one thing, right? And then you provide another. I'm sure we've all bought things offline, and if all of a sudden they're kind of asking for your social security number, you're going to be like, whoa, what is this for? I don't need that, right? You have this expectation, you have this mental model, and a lot of the flows that we work on at Mastercard adhere to the same mental model approach. So there's a little bit of predictability in terms of what's going to surface. And then lastly, what was the inspiration for this idea, right? So we want to make sure we're inspired by our users. We want to make sure that we're solving a problem for them directly, right? So if this isn't a problem for our users, then it probably shouldn't be a new feature, right? And our product partners don't always want to hear that. But at the end of the day, we're only going to have a good product if it's meeting a need. So lastly, content design research. This is huge and something that everyone can do regardless of budget and team, freelance, enterprise. So the first thing is competitive research, right? If I asked you all who our competitors were right now, I'm sure you would get them right? There's not too many. And they're pretty obvious. So we want to make sure that we're differentiating ourselves from our competitors, and a way to do that is improved user experience in our products and thinking outside the box on this. So making sure we're aware and tuned into what they're doing is super important. Likewise, we get a lot of good input research from inspirational research, right? So what's big tech doing? How does Facebook position this? How does Google position this? What's some of the terminology they use? Is that something that's going to work for our user? Is that going to work in our product, right? And there's no shame in that, because these places have crazy budgets, test everything, right? And have teams 3 times the size of ours, right? So it's really important to kind of utilize the work that basically they are already done to figure out what the user's thinking and how they speak about things. The next one is data and feedback, right? So this is very vague, but you should really be gathering feedback from your user, feedback from your product partners, feedback from the team as a whole, and then also qualitative and quantitative data on your content as best you can, right? So that's easier said than done, and design's definitely iterative, but anything from user interviews, you can have incentive for surveys after the fact. You can really just make sure that that's something that you're focused on and a metric for success in your product creation, right? Because you never want to just put something out and it be a guess, right? Well, I think that the user will need this, or based off this one thing that this one person said in a test, we're gonna create this whole flow. You want to make sure that you're looking at a bunch of different people, and then that goes to the 4th point of inclusive design, right? Now more than ever, it's super important to be inclusive in terms of not only who we're designing for, but how we're designing, and the users that we're working with and getting our products in front of. I think Melinda touched on this earlier, but writing in plain language and writing for translation is super important. I mean, in the US, a 6th grade reading level is the average. And so you never want to isolate a user or have them drop off completely because they feel like they can't understand something or it's too difficult. You want to make sure that you're limiting the friction for all, and by kind of catering to a sector of people that may have lower literacy rates or less experience with technology, you're actually going to create a experience with less friction overall, right? Because if they can do it, if my 80-year-old grandma can do it, like anyone can do it, right? And so you should really be kind of putting your products in front of people that maybe wouldn't use them, right? And that's where you can kind of know for sure that they're gonna serve its purpose and the user's gonna be able to get through them. So the last thing that we kind of want to give you guys is these awesome checklists, right? So this is some of the stuff that we focus on for our best practices. Some of the stuff that we mentioned today is just a really easy list to be like, okay, I just wrote a whole flow. Let me just go through it and see what applies, what doesn't. This will allow you to kind of really check yourself and check your work if you don't have someone else to do that for you. And then the other card that we have is kind of things that you don't want to do. So that's focused on, like, this is for Mastercard specifically, right? So your voice and tone, your messaging guide might include exclamation points. It might include contractions. Maybe you're a little bit more informal, but here at Mastercard, these are some of the things that we definitely try to avoid. I think across the board, stuffy business language is definitely something that I had to work on. I always spoke a little bit too professional, right? And being in the financial services industry, that's not always a bad thing, but you don't want to isolate the user with technical jargon or words that are kind of harder than need to be. Those are the 2 cards that we'll share, I think, after our talk, but that's the end. We want to thank you guys so much for being a part and taking your Thursday evening to be with us. Tom Hanks says thank you, so do we.
Thank you.
And now we'll open it up.
Thank you so much. So good.
Thank you, Selene, Melinda, and Etana. This was amazing. Really good material. I hope everyone really enjoyed that. We do have some pretty good questions here lined up from our community. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in with this first one. So often in the product world, it can be challenging to govern your content after launching a feature. Do you have any tips for optimizing product content after its release?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Melinda, do you want to answer this one or?
I mean, well, yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about that. I mean, I think when I first came to Mastercard, for sure, and for a while too, when Selene was there, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Selene. Okay, sorry. I saw your mouth moving. I was like, oh no. Once you shipped something, it was done. And there was, in fact, like a typo on the sign-in screen of one of our products, and I raised the roof trying to figure out how to fix it, and everyone was just like, nope, there's no business case. We can't fix it. But now I think the culture has shifted. We're really relying more on research than we ever have been, and finding ways to optimize things that have already shipped and using data to help us to make the case to do that. So, I mean, my number one recommendation would be if something isn't working and you feel like you need to optimize it, go out and get the data that tells that story for you, and then package it in such a way that people can understand it. People who don't deal with data every day, people who aren't digitally savvy, often, at least in financial services, you're asked to sell to people who don't understand anything about what we do. So it really is about getting outside of your comfort zone and understanding and empathizing for people who don't do this every day and don't necessarily understand how things work, and figuring out how to convince them, how to persuade them that changes should be made. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Cool, thank you. I've got another one here. Let's see. One of your initiatives is establishing Mastercard as a leader in content design externally. What challenges do you see in creating that understanding and appreciation for content design within Mastercard, and how do you overcome that? It's a heavy one.
Yeah, I'll speak to it a little bit. I mean, I think this kind of goes along with what Melinda said before, but I really feel like we've made great strides in creating that appreciation for what we do. But it's hard when you're kind of coming into a place, and, you know, Melinda was the first content person there, and then I was the second. And so suddenly you're telling people who are used to their job encompassing what is now going to be your job, and telling them like, oh, hey, actually, no, you weren't so good at that, so now I'm here to do it. And so there's kind of a gentle way to say, like, it's really about kind of rephrasing and repositioning and showing them like, I'm helping you, I'm taking this off of your plate. And again, it's about telling that story, like showing the before and after, like here was this crazy screen and now it looks like this. And before, users felt like this about it, but now they love it. And so you kind of have to sell yourself in like that. So it's both like a political sell and a business sell, I think, is the way to go about it.
Cool. So it definitely is a strategic move for you, and owning that role also within your team.
Mm-hmm.
And within.
Yeah. I would say too, I agree fully with everything Selene said. And I would just say that it has to be constant. That's the other piece of it, is it's constant. It's not just, oh, I'm going to do this presentation and then everyone will understand what it is I do and why it's important. Like, no, you're going to do so many, and you're going to keep doing it forever, always. And once you wrap your head around it, I think it becomes a little easier.
Right. Cool. Thanks.
I think Etana had something as well that she wanted to say.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think when a lot of people are genuinely relieved also on the other side of things that there is someone else that can kind of take that. And I think that they still have a lot of opinions and they have a lot of input, but at the end of the day, you know what I mean? You can utilize the fact that you're really there to kind of focus and make one specific part of the product really, really good. And I think that is something that, you know, once they realize that, and once you kind of build that trust and that working relationship, and and show your value, it's pretty easy to get buy-in kind of moving forward. I definitely think, you know, shout out to Melinda for kind of paving the way to make it a lot easier for me to kind of advocate in those spaces for sure.
Cool. Thanks, Etana. I've got a question here that is taking us into a bit of a different realm. This person is interested, I'm sure many of us are interested actually, in learning more about content principles in relation to design principles. Are they different? Are they similar? Do they interact or cross over?
I would say similar and a lot of crossover. I mean, if we think about kind of the principles of plain language and accessibility that Melinda and Etana were talking about, there's the idea of, you know, simplicity, being clear and concise. And I think a lot of design languages are aiming for that as well. It's all about the user and how can you make things easier for them. And it's kind of, the answer to that is never going to be complicated and cluttered, whether that's with your design or your words.
Right. Cool. Awesome. I've got a question here as well. We have some really good questions actually, so thank you everyone so much. Keep it coming. This one here is about product content translations. Do you have any tips for QAing those and ensuring that quality?
That is a tough one. I think that is even tougher. Like, that's kind of like, it's, I mean, yeah, oh gosh, it is rough. And it is rough for almost everyone. We're in the throes of figuring that out now. And I have been after this for 3.5 years at Mastercard. So I can tell you, I don't have any actual answers other than some of the things that we are looking at is just improving processes, as well as improving translation itself. We have an issue at Mastercard where we have approved vendors, and those are the ones we use because it is a pain to get new people in. So we use them over and over again, even if they're not great. And we have a translation vendor that is that way. So one of the pieces of the puzzle is fixing that. How do we fix it? How do we make it so that we're building in review maybe on their side instead of on our side, so that we're getting the best translations possible, and that our translation memories are getting updated on their side because they're the ones who store them, we don't. Second piece is, how do we start to own those? Nobody else should have those, we should have them. Again, a conversation I've been having for 3.5 years. It's all about persistence. How do we own them? How do we get them into Mastercard? How do we manage them? How do we link them to our text strings? How do we make it easy for a vendor to get into some third-party software to manage things so that everything isn't hard-coded? How do we automate things? How do we get a style guide that we can pick up on or that others can use so that everything doesn't have to be run through with a fine-tooth comb? We know that certain words are words we don't use. Terminology management, all of these things I think are the key to doing it right. Not saying that we have it right yet, but I think we have an understanding of where we're falling down and where we'd like to improve things.
Cool, awesome. You mentioned style guide, and I've got a question here that I would really like to ask. So about the genesis for your style guide, how it started, how its beginnings to now, how and I know this is a huge topic. How do you start from scratch and get to something that's very very much workable? You can use it in your work. How do you get there? Like, is there you have roadmaps? Do you have everything planned out? It is a mouthful. Bear with me. We've got some curious people here.
Selene, do you
I'll
want
jump in
that?
there?
Selene's in the middle, and Selene's in the middle of this right now, so I feel like it's fresh for her.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the most important thing to point out here is that there's no like such thing as a done style guide. You're always going to be updating it. It's a living document, so you kind of just have to start. You just have to get started, and you just have to keep adding things as you go. It's a great place to document all the decisions that you're making. and to return to again and again. And yeah, like Melinda said, we're kind of now looking at, you know, how can we take these disparate style guides we have for a few different products and think about where can we really align across Mastercard. So in a way, we're kind of in this position of starting over a little bit fresh, but kind of calling into question some of the rules that we have. And it is a large project, and it could be overwhelming, but it's kind of like, you can be like paralyzed by that, but you just gotta get in there and start plugging away at it. And I think also to Etana's point earlier about looking for inspiration, there are many amazing style guides out there, you know, Shopify being one of them. You can look at MailChimp, or even if you're doing something very like specific, like Google has a whole, sorry, like developer style guide that is amazing, and kind of just looking around at what else is out there, even just for, okay, what kind of sections are they including is going to be really important to help you get started.
Awesome, thank you. I've got another question here coming from, I'm assuming a team without a writer, asking what is the minimum you would need for content strategy if you're focused on releasing an MVP, but you don't necessarily have that expertise on your team, content designer or content strategy.
Is that like a minimum number of hours? Or go ahead, Melinda.
Well, do you mean just like what's the minimum that you can do to make the content not suck? Or do you mean?
Yeah, yeah, so yeah, it would be, you know, what's the minimum you need in terms of, do you need some research to be done, improving the terminology, is it about managing the information appropriately throughout the various screens of the experience? Yeah, so it would just be more of a, how much of that expertise do you need in your product development flow for it to actually, I think this is more verbose than it needs to be. Does that make sense, or am I throwing words out there?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a content person, you know, there are things that you can do for sure. I think one of the things that I would always recommend is if you have a competitor, go and steal as much of their stuff as you can. Find existing mental models, move things around, like don't use it verbatim, but find out the shape of the content using existing content if that's possible for you. Find similar things, do benchmarking, lift language from there, beg, borrow, and steal if you don't have a person to do it for you. And then finally, not finally, but another thing that I think is helpful is to run everything through Hemingway or some other online editor that can help you understand, like, can people understand what this means? Is this simple enough for everybody to get when they're scanning and not paying that much attention? Those are the two big ones, I think. As far as research, obviously you can do research and get feedback on things. Have a set list of product terms that you use to name the products, to name the features within your product, can be really helpful for everybody. We did, at the beginning of one of our products, we did a mapping where we just put all the features out in like a whiteboard, a digital whiteboard, and we're like, this maps to this, and this is how we talk about that interaction, and this is how we talk about this interaction. And anybody can do that. You don't have to be a writer to do that. So those are things that I think would help.
Cool, thank you. We have maybe a minute left, and I'd love to squeeze in this last question, if that's okay with everyone. Looking at tools, do you have any tools that you specifically use for managing content inventory that have been very helpful over the past few years?
For managing an inventory of content?
Content audits, content inventories.
Yeah, I mean, we're trapped. I'm sorry, I'm happy to let other people answer. I would just say in the past, I have used Google Sheets for a lot of that. It's been really great. But we're kind of trapped without access to cloud services for the most part, although now we have like Microsoft Teams and the Office 365 suite. So yeah, so any way that you're not just passing things around, where you can be, where several people can be inside a document. You could do it on a whiteboard, a digital whiteboard. You could do it wherever you're able to make sure that everybody can kind of tick boxes. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add from their previous lives anywhere, as far as content calendars, things like that?
Yeah, I actually haven't used anything except for Google Sheets or some sort of collaborative spreadsheet. So I haven't like done a dive into any of the software specifically for that. But maybe one day.
People use Gather Content, I know, and the Contentful is another one. It kind of depends on what you do. Like, we don't do content marketing per se. We dip our toes in it, but we don't, that's not our bread and butter. So we haven't found the need for that stuff, but I hear people love it.
Cool, good to know, thank you. Katie, do you have any closing remarks, questions at this point?
No, this was so great. Thank you all so much for joining us. That was a lot of great information for just under an hour. I mean, that's awesome. So thank you again for joining us. I will say thanks to Shopify for sponsoring, even though there's no food and beverage for anyone to enjoy today, but yeah, there's that. And the last thing I guess I'll say, we will be sharing a recording after this, so stay tuned. And we've also been doing little member Q&A spotlights weekly on our Meetup YouTube channel. So check them out, get to know Janice. She was on the first one, and Jafar, who was on the second, and reach out to me if you want to be featured next. I mean, the goal is, as always, to just keep the community connected and help people, meet one another. So check them out. Thank you all, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thanks for having us.